Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carolyn Bennett-Glaude from Southeastern New York Library Resources Council. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We have always been at war with computers. Before we get started, I just want to take care of some housekeeping. I'm here to help you with any tech issues, and that includes captioning, sound, and requesting a CE certificate. You can get my attention via the chat today, and I'll be watching the chat once Jessamyn and Ollie start their presentation. So this webinar had an enthusiastic response, and we're expecting almost 100 people here today. And despite the high numbers, we wanted to stay in a Zoom meeting, which means that you have the ability to turn your video and microphones on and off. So if you could just take a moment now to check your settings and make sure those are off unless you intended them to be on. If anyone has their microphone on during the presentation, we're going to reserve the right to mute you so that we can minimize some of the background noise and distractions. You are very welcome to turn them back on again for Q&A or if you want to get someone's attention. All the attendees are expected to follow Southeastern's code of conduct or be subject to removal from the webinar. And to summarize, that just means please treat all staff, event attendees, and speakers with respect in the chat and in the Q&A. So as you can see, this presentation is being recorded. We will process the recording and post it as soon as we can. We will also share the slides and any resources that are available. When everything is ready, we will email that link to all the registrants. So please check your email for that in the next few days. You should also keep a lookout for the link to request a CE certificate that will be coming out via the chat towards the end of the webinar. You will need to attend the live presentation to request a CE certificate, so keep an eye out on the chat. And we're also going to send you a link to the evaluation, which we always truly appreciate you completing. So now that I've completed the housekeeping, I'd like to introduce our speakers, Jessamyn West and Ali Ruiz.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Ale and I were not expecting to be in the same room, but we're delighted to be able to. We are going to kick this off with our slides. We hope to have a little bit of time afterwards for questions. We both live in Central Vermont. I'm a librarian who also works for the Flickr Foundation, and I'll let Ale introduce himself and kick us off.
Hi, everyone. I'm a little taller, so I have to hold my mic. Okay, let's get these slides going. All right. All right, hi, everyone. My name is Ali. I'm a PhD student at UVM at the Complex Systems Institute, and I've been working with computers for too long, maybe like 15 years now. And yeah, this is our talk. We've always been at war with computers. Okay, so before we really get into it, I will, a lot of people talk about tech and computers, and there's a lot of critique out there. And I really want to ground this in what computers actually are and what they do, which I think is often missing in these critiques. So the first handful of slides, maybe first 15 minutes, is actually going to be a crash course on computation itself. And so we're going to talk about computers. We're going to build a theory of them. And with the computers we talk about, they're physical devices that can do math. And specifically, for us, they're going to be a battery. There's going to be inputs, which are switches. Some circuitry is going to happen. There's a physical device. And then that will output into light bulbs. And so this is going to be we're going to deal with a few of these at first. So switches have only two states, which means we have to understand binary. This slide works better in a physical room. I'm not going to explain the joke, but what I normally do is I listen for the laughs, and I'm going to explain binary, then I'll show it again, and if more people laugh, I succeeded in explaining it. So bear with me for the virtual presentation. Okay, so everyone's heard computers are ones and zeros. I want to make sure we all understand what that means. So we all know how to count to 10. You start at, count to 10. We start at 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 10 fingers. Right. But what would you do if you removed the character 9? right? So if you wanted to count, you still have the same number of objects that you want to count, but you don't have the character 9. Whoop. So you'd roll right over it. You'd say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but then you'd get to 8. You're going to have 9, 10, 11. And that's how you'd write it. It's the same number of things, but we're representing it with one fewer character. And you can do that all the way down to 0, and you would end up counting like this. So you represent numbers this way, right? This is 0, 1, then the number that we call 10, which is really 2, etc. Right? You can do this forever. And this is how binary works. This is what people say when they say computers only know ones and zeros. Ha ha, you all get it now. Very funny slide. Great. And then the other piece that we have to explain that's really fundamental to the core of computing is logic gates. So I'm going to argue that you already kind of intuitively, maybe you don't understand the gate and you don't understand how it works, but this is something that you understand can happen, right? Circuitry can exhibit this logic because you all have something like it in your house, which is the three-way switch, right? You have 2 switches at the end of the hallway. No matter which one you switch, the light turns either on or off. That's called an XOR gate. And the XOR gate, X stands for exclusive and OR is OR, right? So if either one is on, but not both, the light turns on. There's a bunch of gates there, and we'll go through a couple of them. And means you have 2 switches, you have 1 light bulb on the other end. If both of them are on, then the light bulb turns on. There's a bunch of them. OR is like the XOR, except it's non-exclusive, so both of them on also lights. Not super important, but you get the idea, right? There's a bunch of these little circuits. They're helpful. They do this little like piece of logic for you. And then, if you start, this is kind of nuts really, but like if you put these together, you can trick them to do math, which is pretty crazy. So this is the Model K, and this is the first ever addition machine. So, see, I don't know if you can see my mouse. Do you think they can see my mouse? Okay, well, we'll skip the mouse. So
We can see
you
your
can.
mouse.
Wonderful. Okay, so I love this machine. It's so nice. So here's I believe this was cut from like a cigar tin or something. And so we have some switches. Here's the circuitry. We're not going to worry too much about how they work. Here's the battery, and here's the lights. And what this machine let you do is you input either 0 or 1, right? Switch on or off. Either 0 or 1, switch on or off. And then the lights add these numbers for you in binary. So here's how it works. I have to apologize for this being kind of backwards. So, on the left, we have the input. And then as we know, you have to read from bottom to top. Sorry about that. But it's 0, 1, that's number 1. 1 and 1 is 2. And then on the other side, or 1 and 1 is going to add to 2. Okay, let's go through this GIF. So when you add 0 and 0, you get 0. We know that. When you add 1 and 0, you get 1. Okay, that makes sense. And when you add 1 and 1, you get 2. And we know from our little crash course on binary that that's how you represent the number 2 in binary. Okay. And now we'll talk about Turing machines. So this is a really big topic that I can't get into in a ton of detail. But basically, okay, we have this addition machine. That's pretty slick, actually. It's like kind of crazy that you can trick, electronic components to do math for you. That in itself is sort of like non-trivial and interesting. But it would be really awful if you had to build a physical machine every time you wanted to do any computing, right? I have my addition machine, my subtracting machine, my like whatever machine. And so we have this idea of the general purpose computer that can compute anything that a machine can compute. And so we call these Turing machines. I'm simplifying a little bit, but really not that much. So a Turing machine isn't a physical machine. It's an abstract model of computing. And it's from 1936, Alan Turing. And then I said it's not a physical machine, but people do make physical things based on the Turing machine. Here's an image from Wikipedia of one. And how they work is there's a tape, right? So we can go back to the slide. That's what they build. So Turing imagined the tape. And this tape is infinitely long because it's an abstract machine, and we can do things like that in the fake world. And the tape has a head, and the head can move left or right, it can read, and it can write. And in Turing's paper, he actually doesn't, it's a person. The head is like a person. He's like, we're going to give this very dumb person these instructions, and this person is going to follow them. But in the when people build them, obviously that the whole point is to not have a person do these things. So there's this tape, there's a head, and what people have realized is there's some number of operations that you can do with this format that amount to being able to satisfy all of computation. This isn't a thing I can prove to you right now because I only have like 25 minutes, but I just want to build some intuition so where we started was we have these simple logic gates, right? And by adding layers of abstraction, we end up at this model of computing that can sort of that can simulate any of these physical devices, right? And so just to gain a little more intuition, so we have these little blobs, right? There's a tape, or you can even think of it as like a tray where you either have a marble or take a marble off, and you can chunk that and then give it meaning. And then even the program itself, in a lot of Turing machine sort of conceptions, is stored on tape. Some people will store it on cards separately from the tape. Doesn't really matter too much for our purposes. But what really matters is for reasons of incredible like math and luck and just the universe aligning, this is enough to simulate all of the sort of like circuitry that we discussed before. And finally, this is the last slide with which I will torture you about computation. I just want to ground it. Turing machines are a little abstract, and I want to ground them in what your computer actually does. So your computer has a CPU. That's where all the circuitry lives. This is, the Turing machine model is still how computation works. So your computer, the CPU has this computation thing. Then you have RAM, which is sort of your notebook, right? That's where you're like quick operations. It's quick to write and read, but it can't hold a ton. Then you have the hard drive, which is long-term storage. And your computer lives on a clock. So computers are a clock-based thing. And they do fetch, decode, execute, fetch, decode, execute. And that is the CPU fetches data. It decodes that data. It stores it in its very limited working memory, and it does stuff. And that's going to be our model of computation for the rest of this talk. Okay, that's really cool. I mean, we tricked sand into thinking. That's incredible. Shouldn't be possible, I feel like, but it is, and we did it. But we're stuck with sort of this like weird conflict, which is, that's amazing, but kind of most software seems to suck. And the rest of my portion of this talk is going to be about that. And so I want to start by kind of distinguishing. There is a kind of a big debate about whether software engineering is engineering. I'm not going to wade into that, but I will say that most engineering, you want to build a bridge, right? If you want to build a bridge, you probably sit down on some paper, you calculate things out, you make a little model of the world, but then you have to go back into the real world and move concrete and build the physical bridge. This is really distinct from software engineering. In software engineering, we create a fake world, and then in that fake world, you can do anything that you can formally specify. Right? This is really different. The sort of relationship between the artifact that's created, so code, and the engineer is fundamentally different at that level. Yeah, yeah. They think of themselves as similar, but it's very different. And this is getting a little bit in the weeds. I've worked in software engineering for a lot of years. I think many of the failures in engineering processes come from this like conflation between the two. But anyway, from this property, I think there's a lot. This is a rich topic, and I'm getting this from this book, Computation and Human Experience. But from this property, I'm going to pull 3 resulting kind of emergent phenomena that I want to talk about. But this is in no way the only thing that you can pull from this. I think it's really a lot. There's a lot here to theorize about. But we're going to talk about this gives computers a directionality, meaning that you have this fake world and things have to go into the fake world. And that's a very specific and directional process. it gives it a network ability, meaning that like you have these little fake worlds, but because of how computers work, they're just switches and circuitry, you can sort of like create giant networks of these fake worlds upon which we are discussing things today. And it makes them this general purpose, right? So every fake world, you can do anything that you can do on any fake world because you can do anything that can be formally specified in code. So in the directionality, so they have to be reducible to strict instructions. And to do that, I don't feel like I'm reducible to strict instructions. I'm sure most of you feel the same way. This talk is happening over computers, and I think this has a flattening effect, right? Like I can't see you, you can't see how tall I am. You have only a limited number of colors, etc. Right? This has a flattening effect. So things pass through into this fake world, and they have to take on this sort of like simplified form, something that's formally representable. And so what does that mean? It means, well, that is not necessarily bad, right? Like the world's really complicated, and often I want it to be simpler. And you can think of like maybe the prototypical example here is an Excel sheet, right? Like actually keeping track of everything at work is really hard, but if I simplify it to a few quantities and I put them on a sheet, that makes it really easy. I can like the world's simplified, and now I can count how many apples I have or whatever. But what ends up happening is that this is how it actually works, which is you are forced to be simplified for the purposes of the people designing the software, right? So you and I, in general, are not the people who get to design how software works or how it gets used. Normally, someone above us is forcing us to use software. And so what ends up happening is we are forced through this simplifying process, right? We've all experienced this. This is like, your university admin forcing you to like register through this like horrible interface, or the DMV, right? Like there's a million examples of this experience of someone with power over you designing software to make their lives easier at your expense. And yeah, library catalogs, I'm told from the resident librarian as an example. Okay, so networkability. So this machine, it's rigid, right? It's easily controlled by top-down power structures. And it's not just easily controlled, it's totally controlled, right? What the code says, it's what's going to happen. This is not like the bridge where I can sort of like use it and I can climb it from the piles, right? Like no, like what the code says will happen, will happen. The form validates, there's no getting around it. If there is, that's a bug and they will fix it. So this rigid machine that flattens things can be omnipresent, right? It's one thing if your computer terminal, if it's 1994 and your computer terminal lives in your lab and you walk away, but here it's like, you could run an entire warehouse based on these little general purpose controlling machines and put them everywhere. And a really good example of that is the Amazon warehouse, right? Like they're being flattened to the point where their bathroom breaks aren't available. And I'm sure this is not something I have to harp on and you've all experienced in your lives. And just another example, right? Like you can see why this grounding this in computers is useful right off the bat, right? Like think about the Tinder experience. I mean, liking is literally binary. Like talk about like a perfect computerized representation that like is forcing you to flatten. Like I can't decide whether I like people or not in binary based on like 5 photos of them. That's a design that is forcing you to simplify yourself for the purposes of representation on a computer. That has nothing to do with how we actually want to interact with each other. All right, now this is the last of these that kind of ties them together. If we were in the room, I would force you all to participate, but you're all spared for this. So I want to design a technology together really quickly. And so I have this piece of wood here and it has a nail. I think it'd be pretty slick if I could bury this nail deeper into this wood. What would it look like? Well, if you were in the room, you'd probably say things like, oh, it'd be nice if it was heavy, so I don't have to bash it in with my hand. What if I had like a lever, right? Like a long lever, maybe like some sort of claw at the end to pull it out. And we draw a picture and you kind of get how this is going to work. And we draw a picture of something like this. And that's pretty cool. But one thing, I think this is a picture of a real hammer, obviously. And one thing we actually under even such a simple problem, the technology here is underspecified, right? So for example, the color. We didn't never had to talk about the color, and the color doesn't affect how you hammer in the nail, right? There's all this writing on it. There's kind of these like little design features that like maybe don't really matter. Like, does it really have to get narrower than bigger? When you make an artifact, you have to make all of these decisions, and many of these decisions are not don't derive directly from the specifications of the problem, right? And this is true even when you make like a hammer, which is sort of the prototypical example of a simple technology, but it's way more true of when you make computer code, because computers can do anything that you specify that they do, right? So we have this, well, oftentimes clients will ask me to make them an app that does a thing, but then I have to go out and write like 20,000 lines of code. And there's tons of ways I could have done that, but I have to decide at every line of code. I have to actually sit down and write it, and no one else can specify that for me, right? So this kind of creates a space where we can smuggle in. Smuggle's maybe that's too loaded of a word, and I shouldn't have used it. But creates a space where lots of values end up as a part of technology, and that comes from as simple as I want to keep this easy and cheap, or as complex as like replicating the power structures of the people who built it. And these design decisions are cumulative, right? So I'm going to use a simple example of not a computer thing, because we all know what car-dependent suburbia, right? We made the car, and now we built the infrastructure around the car. And car-dependent suburbia is sort of an emergent property of these cumulative design decisions. And we can use tools counter to their design, right? We can get a car and go blow up a car factory. The people at the car factory definitely didn't want to do that, but that doesn't negate the cumulative social aspects of these design decisions, right? So there's maybe like a little bit of there's space to operate against the design, but those design decisions still add up. And these 2 points are in tension. There's, on the one hand, there's almost this deterministic quality to the cumulative aspects, but then on the other hand, there is space, right? It's not totally deterministic. And those interests, that cumulative thing creates interests. This cumulative thing represents the interests of the people who got to design the technology. And I'm getting all this from this book from Andrew Feenberg. His really nice quote: "What human beings are and will become is decided in the shape of our tools, no less than in the action of statesmen and political movements." And now I hand off.
Hey, that was just me getting a pen so that I could write down some notes to talk about, like, yeah, that's sort of what Ali said. Oh, right. And I am shorter. Perfect. And so that's a lot about the hardware. And I think it's really useful and important to understand sort of what our limitations are in the hardware. And then we talk a little bit about, or I talk a little bit about, what about the wetware, like the human part of this software? What about the software users? And software users basically get a user interface to all of these back-end decisions that are happening in zeros and ones and ons and offs and batteries and light bulbs and storage and etc. So a user interface is just any way you would interact with a computer. Command line is a user interface. Technically, it's just not a graphical one. And I think most of us, most of the time, are dealing with graphical user interfaces. And that's where humans get to decide how much you're able to interact with a program, right? So all I talked about is 20,000 lines of code that do decisions and sort of make the computer do the thing, but then there's additional code sort of that decides how you're allowed to interact. What's a button, what's a slider, what's going to be part of the thing. And for most people interacting with software, websites, web apps, it's all kind of the same thing. That's sort of where things can go wrong, right? You're expecting a button, but instead there's a link. You want to go to the next page of the thing, but you can't figure out where the function is to do that. You're trying to submit a form, but it says that your phone number isn't a phone number. This one drives me crazy. My bank does this. If I don't put the dashes in a phone number to submit a form, it's like, I don't know what these 10 numbers are supposed to do. And I'm like, are you serious? We have not moved past this, but that was just a decision someone made to not validate that number. And people make these decisions all the time, either on purpose or just sort of by accident, by not thinking, oh, a user might want to use this in this way. Or the thing we get a lot in sort of rural Vermont is like you type in a zip code to get a package delivered, and it says, oh, hey, you live in East Brookfield, which is the next town over, when in point of fact, I live in Randolph, but East Brookfield comes first alphabetically in all the towns that are served by my zip code. So it's the one that the fill-in form automatically gives to me. I understand how this works because I'm a technologist, but a lot of people don't, and they're just really confused that they tried to type in their zip code and then the computer tried to sort of argue with them. Happens a lot in Vermont. When I used to teach computer classes for adult ed, and now I do mostly drop-in time at the public library. In fact, that's where I'm going after this. People come in with their computer questions and we just kind of talk about it. But when I used to teach formal classes, it would usually be about Microsoft Word or Facebook, and we'd call the class, its official name was like Learning Word, and its unofficial name was Where are the tiny triangles that are hiding all of the stuff I want to interact with? And these tiny triangles that open little menus or that open sort of a pull down menu or something like that, they would hide not just like stuff maybe you didn't use that often, but also sometimes they'd hide stuff that the software makers didn't really want you to use that often, like changing your privacy settings to something that gave you more privacy, or maybe saying you didn't want targeted advertising instead of just having random advertising. I'm one of those people who still uses social media, and every now and again I like go through Instagram and tell it like, no, I'm actually not interested in that thing that I accidentally left running when I went to go make tea, and now you think I'm really into, I don't even remember, it was like people who have trigger finger problems and need medicine. And you have to go in a complicated way to figure out sort of how not to do that. And these tiny triangles, Ollie was talking about sort of the interests of the people who design the software. These tiny triangles and what we call small targets, they're small for a number of reasons, right? One of them is that the people who build software tend to be young. They are a large degree under 40. That's like sort of what the math says. But in startup companies, a lot of times they're even younger. They're under 30. And the only reason we really care about that is that that means things just generically about them as a group, right? They have better vision. They're mostly able-bodied. They grew up with technology their whole lives, which is really an important distinction between their generation and, say, my generation. I'm in my mid-50s, and I got to watch a lot of this stuff happen, but I didn't have the internet in high school, as an example. Which gives me different sort of expectations about what I think a program should be doing. Many of the people who design this software have no real mental model of what it's like to be learning technology right now. Like at the library last week, I helped somebody make their first cellular telephone call. And they have different expectations of what software could and could not do for them than people who have just sort of always had a phone in their pocket. And, the idea that someone might not know the difference between a one-time login code and a password and a screen lock and a laptop password. And I was helping a woman do something with an iPad calendar that wasn't updating the way it was supposed to. And we needed all 4 of those separate codes in order to solve her problem. And so when we talk about a user interface, you can think of it as doing kind of 2 major things. It allows you, the user, to interact with the software the way you want. So you go in and you're like, I want to listen to a podcast, or I want to watch some stand-up comedy on this video channel, or I want to send a message to my friend. But it also does frequently, more and more lately, nudge you towards using the software or the web page the way the software designer wants you to. So often that involves paying a little bit of money or giving out your personal information. So these 3 examples are like, Instagram would really like to know who all my friends are, and it kind of hits this button a lot like, hey, do you want to allow us to access your contacts. And, you can learn more or continue, but there's no button for like, no, and don't ask me again. Or a lot of people show up at the library and they're like, I got a message that my storage is full. And I'm like, okay, tell me more. And often it's their Apple, it's their iCloud storage, or it's their Google, I don't even know what they call it anymore, OneDrive storage, something like that. And for a lot of these people, if they look at a thing that says, would you like to pay 49 cents to not have to figure out what's going on here? They're like, yeah, that sounds great. Like a little bit of money, what do I care? But it sort of adds up over time. And also these are introductory rates and et cetera. And then the last one drives me crazy. It's just me and my supermarket app trying to figure out what's on sale. And I need to go through a nested menu and then a nested menu after that, just to look at the app and figure out where the sales are, which, it makes sense to me because I understand what the software is trying to do. They're trying to maybe have me not buy some stuff on sale. But it means for me wanting to do what I want to do, it's extra work. And it always feels a little bit like wrestling with a company, because usually when you're using an app or you're interacting with software, you're interacting with a business, even if it's a business run by a nonprofit like our library catalogs. This is just an aside. I follow a lot of blind users on social media because it's always good to kind of know how people are experiencing things in different ways to my own. And assistive technology, including like voice agents and that kind of stuff, can be a real boon to them as users, but developers often leave them out of the conversation because a lot of people see accessibility as kind of a nice to have and not necessary. In fact, it's often in many countries, including this one, legally necessary part of software. And accessible options don't just help people who have visual issues or hearing issues, they help everybody. Like, who hasn't turned on like Netflix captions because they want to eat something crunchy and also know what's going on the screen, right? Who among us? And that's true a lot, right? I want to watch like some Instagram stand-up comic while my partner's asleep. And I can do that watching captions because most comics who want you to continue to watch their stuff include captions, like not because they're accessibility nuts, but because like it's good business for them. But for a lot of businesses, it's not. But also thinking about like maybe you've got to shake a hand and there's a bigger space to click on. That helps everyone. Maybe blinky features give you headaches because you've had a long day. That helps everyone. But it is worth thinking about all the things that we don't pay for. It often means there's sort of a thing that is making money for the company, and it's worth thinking kind of what is that. And we have this saying that's like, if you're not paying for it, you're not actually the customer, you're the product being sold. And what we find is a lot of times, especially nowadays, applications and websites are interested in economies of scale, right? They want to make a thing and move from 10 users to 10,000 users to 1 million users without having to hire 1 million extra people, right? They want the software to do more of the work that human beings would do. And we're not going to talk about it today, but like that's the AI revolution in a nutshell, right? Like, how do I replace every single customer service person with a robot that's good enough, right? Interesting, right? Those are all about economies of scale, initial investment so that we can then have a service that runs without annoying human beings that need to use the bathroom and want their human rights not violated at their job. And 3 people can use a website as easily as 1 can, sure, but like, can 3 million? So the ultimate goal, get more people using stuff, minimal investment, find other ways to make money with people who are using their stuff. And so, this isn't just selling you more space on Google Cloud. This can also include like your personal data. So if we know stuff about you or where you live or who you're related to, Facebook loves this one, right? Like suggesting friends to you that are just like your ex-boyfriend that you'd prefer not to hear from, but they know you know all the same people. Your shopping habits, of course, right? Because if they know you bought a thing, maybe you're more likely to buy another thing. But I don't know if anybody's seen like the Amazon, like, hey, you bought a washing machine. Would you like to look at 7 more washing machines? Like the robots are dumb, but also, a lot of times it works. But figuring out how things work on you for shopping. Your personal beliefs. If you're somebody who votes, your voting history, not who you voted for, but whether you voted in which elections, are public. Who you donated to politically, that's public. That can be corroborated with websites you visit, posts you look at on social media, people who you follow, or people who you block. And also awkwardly health information. Like I went to my pharmacy to get some new medication and it cost more than I wanted. And they were like, oh, you can actually use GoodRx and get that medication for like half price. And I'm like, okay, what's the catch? And they're like, well, the catch is GoodRx is a company that now knows you take that medicine. They make money off of making your personal data sort of all mushed together with other stuff, and now they know you're a lady of a certain age taking medicine for ladies of a certain age, and that can all be corroborated to help sell me stuff or whatever, or even health arguments you get into on social media platforms or other places. Are you somebody who likes to yell about vaccines? Well, we know that about you, and we can roll that into your political beliefs and your personal beliefs and try and sort of target things to you. And then what targeting means in a lot of cases can be stuff like the algorithms, especially on social media, but also other places, that try to kind of figure things out about you to sort of lean you in different ways. We've all kind of heard about people who can get radicalized by like having YouTube suggest videos to them that are more and more about super right-wing stuff, whereas they might have only just been kind of centrist to begin with. The algo, like I said, is kind of stupid in a lot of ways. Like it thinks I should follow JD Vance on Instagram, which is a terrible suggestion and not one that I'm following. Or it thinks my supermarket app that I love to hate, which is like, hey, FYI, you bought 103 servings of grains, as if number one, I don't know what I bought. And number two, I wasn't just stocking up on oatmeal. Like, ugh, leave me alone. And then it tried to sell me a credit card while I was waiting for my groceries in curbside pickup. By the way, dairy is also protein. So I don't even, as a librarian, this taxonomy offends me. But, but the people who are creating the supermarket app, they're not taxonomists, right? They're young men and women who have a job to do, which is mostly see if I can get sold a credit card while I wait in a parking space. And so some of this tech is trying to take analog things that we know of, like taxis are now Uber and hotels are now Airbnb and movies are now Netflix, except in Vermont, where we all agree that we live in 1974 and people write checks for everything. And we like and make them worse and more complicated by making them digital, right? Like I work at a public library, as I think many of you did based on the introductions. And this is how you used to get books, right? Like a nice lady or a nice man handed it over and said, hope you enjoy it. It's due back in 2 weeks. And that was the end. And then you had a functional thing that you could interact with. You had content that you could interact with. Now, and I really suggest tracking down this initial comic strip because it is great. But basically, we have a lot more books available in the public library, which is fantastic. More books, love it. But thanks to ebooks being available through software, like Libby is a great one. Palace Project is one that we have in Vermont. There's a couple more. I just noticed that Simply E that came out from New York Public Library is sunsetting like, oh, this week, I think, because I think they decided other people have good products and they don't need to keep supporting it. And supporting software is like a real job, right? You can't just make it and send it out into the world and have it just work forever. But getting an ebook is a total headache for novice computer users, right? For people who are used to it or for whom it's set up or for who's expecting it. cool. But otherwise, there's a ton of steps involving downloading software, registering accounts, getting passwords, etc. And ebooks are difficult to get, not because there's anything about a digital book that's complicated, but because we've got publishers in the mix. They need to make money. They make more money if there's more rules about how people can get ebooks. We have ebooks that expire, like as a library, you buy an ebook, but you only get it for 26 lens or whatever. That's got nothing to do with digital files. That has everything to do with Hachette or whatever the publisher is wanting to be able to make a little bit more money. And honestly, they'd probably prefer we didn't lend ebooks at all, even though they make so much money off of us, which frustrates me a lot. And they make them difficult to get, kind of also so you don't steal them, meaning just take a digital file and you have it and you can give it to your friend. And this makes me very conflicted as a librarian because I know how to steal ebooks and I see my frustrated patrons in the library, but it's not cool to just give somebody a link because I also believe that authors and artists all deserve to get paid. But these hurdles are ridiculous, and trying to figure out how to be an ethical librarian in 2025 can be really difficult. And when I see people in the library who are having trouble getting an ebook, 90% of the time they think they don't know how to use the software, and they're usually not accurate about that. They think it's their fault. They think they're stupid. They think they don't understand technology in general, that they're not smart enough, that they're not tech smart enough, that everybody else knows it and they don't. And, the ads make it look easy. And one of the things that I sort of tell people is, it's not that places can't make software easier to use. It's that they won't or don't, and understanding their motivations can help you, the person, definitely me, the librarian, but also them, the patrons, feel a little bit better about the exchange. And one of the things that I'm really here to say is that there's options available to you, and you especially. Oh, thank you so much, Ariana, for linking to that comic. It is my favorite thing. And it's kind of a deep cut at this point. As you can see, it's from 1212. I don't know what that is. But so when you're a librarian who's paying attention to your patrons who themselves may be struggling with software, or if you're struggling with software, pay attention to sort of what the deals are that software is asking you to make, right? Like if I get food at McDonald's to pick up at the drive-through, it's a real divide the room thing too, talking about McDonald's, especially where I live in Vermont. It's the only fast food we have available in town, and there's a lot of people in town who pretend it either doesn't exist or that it's dead to them. But for me, if I'm getting a chicken sandwich, you can press a button that's let us track where your car is the whole way to McDonald's so that we can have it ready for you when you get here. But that's a deal, right? You don't have to make that deal. And what it's giving them is more behavioral information about you. And I'm not one of those super privacy people, my phone number is on the internet. But not everybody is me. And thinking about both yourself and also the people you're helping, and help them, yourself and them, make conscious choices. Do you want to pay extra for storage, or would you like to figure out what's using up all the space on your phone? Usually it's 3 giant videos of grandchildren, right? We can put these somewhere else and then you don't have to pay Google 50 cents a month. Love it. Except that making software work for you will take a little bit of extra time. The easy way out is almost always doing what the tech companies want for you. But you can make your smart TV dumb. Just tell it you don't have any internet. You can turn off your listening devices if you want to, and not have Hey Siri, but press a button instead, as an example. You can choose not now every time Instagram would really like to know who all your friends are. You can depersonalize stuff, even though the places will be but you're going to get really terrible advertising. And I'm that's cool with me. All advertising is terrible. I don't care if it's personalized or not. You can block ads using very simple browser plugins. It's just click, click. Oh, suddenly I don't see ads anymore. Amazing. Is that immoral? I don't think so, but you can also turn them on for your favorite local newspaper if you want to. You can use Signal instead of your phone's chat app so that all of your personal information doesn't go through Android, Apple, whoever owns your phone, Samsung. Ugh, I don't know who makes phones anymore. You can look for open source options and communities. So, you can maybe skip the Chrome browser and use Firefox, even though I think they're built on the same. Nope, they're not. They're not. Firefox isn't built on a Chromium. And, you'll see people on the internet who are like, they're all just as bad. And I'm here to say that I don't really think they are just as bad, right? It's often making the least bad choice. But think about what the least bad choice is for you and for the people you work for. Um, Understanding what works for other people may not work for you. The hardest thing I had to learn in doing drop-in time at the library, which I've done for probably 15 years now, is people come in with computers that are not working for them. And I have a computer that works for me, and it is easy for me to be like, have you thought about getting a Mac to somebody who's been using a PC for 15 years? Or better yet, you see this on the internet all the time. Linux would fix that problem. And I'm here to say I spent 2.5 hours last weekend trying to get Linux working on an old laptop, and it was a huge challenge and ultimately didn't work. So be careful what you recommend to other people who are not yourself, because I'm about as good at computers as one can be without being a programmer, and Linux is still a dark art to me. And then, of course, you mentioned it on the internet, and there's a whole bunch of nice young men who are trying to tell you how to do it differently. Don't be those guys. Just understanding what works for other people may not work for you. Try to help people in this, where they meet people where they are. And most importantly, and this is what Carolyn was saying at the very beginning and where I'm going to kind of wrap up, tell yourself and tell other people that you work with, I'm not bad at technology. This is a bad piece of technology. It's a bad app. It's a bad website. Let's, in my case at the library, let's you and I start attacking this together and do it in a way that'll ultimately make it work for you. So this is Jessamyn and Ale. We have always been at war with computers. We've got a couple minutes if people want to ask questions. And I encourage you to get in touch with either of us if there's stuff you'd like to talk more about. We can definitely read up in the chat if anybody has a chat question. Whoop, sorry.
Great question.
Can we? Yes, we can. What just happened there? Hold on. Yes. Oh my God.
So much for computers.
I think so. Is that it? Can you see that now? Now can I see the chat?
Great.
Great. Yes, you might be able to wrap up class early and still get your CE certification, but also we're happy to talk technology stuff. We made sure we didn't run over because I have to be at the library at 2 p.m., but we would be happy to talk more. And please fill out your evaluation forms.
Tip your bartenders.
Any last words?
Throw your computer in the lake. Win the war.
That was great. I'm trying to think of like, why didn't I plant some questions? Because we have you and it's a great resource. And I also appreciate you calling out the difficulty with getting materials from the library. Oh, did I? And look, see? Thank you, person who wanted to fill out an evaluation, but realized I just sent the same link twice. That
Computers, they're super complicated. Why
Yeah.
does Google have these do you know why Google has these incredibly cryptic
No.
URLs for their content?
No, readable URLs is a solved problem and Google can do better.
Yes. As Allah said, readable URLs is a solved problem. Google could do better. It's not a can't thing, it's a won't thing.
It's right there with Google Reader. RIP. Still
Oh my
mourning
God,
years later.
RIP.
Yeah.
I could do a whole talk on why I wish RSS would come back and become
Uh,
a way people. Yeah, Zoom URLs. My partner has a customizable URL at work, and so it's just I don't know, zoom.harvard.edu/my.dog.has.fleas, and no one forgets it. I really encourage people to customize everything you can customize because it makes you happier to interact with the thing a lot of the time.
yeah. Um, y'all are too well behaved. We were like coming into this being like, uh-oh, what if everyone's gonna unmute and talk? And now we're like begging you all unmute and talk. Um, if you have anything.
Well, and there's alternatives to Zoom, even though you may not be able to use it with your institution. But like we use Whereby at my job, which doesn't have some of the same limitations. Jitsi is a great one. I've used that a lot. What do you use when you do? Do you use mostly Zoom?
I gave up.
What do you mean you gave up?
I don't
You're
need
in
it.
a Zoom right
I don't
now.
need with people anymore. No, I actually normally try to use Signal Video. Um, yeah.
Mm.
Signal video? Yeah, there is. Um, I'll send it to Carolyn, but there's a good website that tells you that its only job is to give you open access or open source alternatives to
Mm.
like the usual stuff. Like, oh, do you use QuickBooks? You can use New Cash. That's New Cash with a G. Um, yeah, the Zoom one's in the chat. Can you hold?
Yeah, and it is gonna take me a minute to download and upload the recording. So if you all want to send me um links like the links that you're coming up with, I can send that all with the materials. Probably send that out early next week. So, um, and while you're typing, I see there Tessa has a question in the chat. Do you have any comments on the de-anonymization of the web, like
Oof,
real
this
names
is a
over
you.
usernames?
This is a you question.
I mean, I think it's a real thing where we see that corporations really value sort of their own. I think people say like anonymity creates all these problems, and then they point to like things like 4chan or whatever, which are sort of ridiculous way out there counterexamples. We found for a long time, I used to run a big sort of online community that like absolute anonymity, meaning you don't have sort of a continuity of character or identity, can sometimes be a problem because then you get a lot of bad actors kind of pretending to argue against themselves, or like the lurkers support me in email, kind of where there's a whole bunch of people that all pretend to support you, but they're really all you, like on Wikipedia. But continuity, where you have pseudonymity, I don't even know how to say that word out loud, but you have a pseudonym, but it's a consistent pseudonym, seems to be a really good balance between a real names thing and sort of absolute chaos, which itself is a problem. I think the de-anonymization of the web is a mistake. I think one of the reasons people do it is specifically so they can put more stuff into your social graph and know more about you. Like, I belong to an online trivia league, and please hold your snickering, but like, I belong to an online trivia league, and we do have to use our real names there. And it is interesting that the people for whom that's not a problem and the people for whom it is a problem really do divide along more and less disadvantaged people, right? There's a lot of trans members who feel like using their real name because maybe their real name is not the name they use anymore. I mean, real, what does real even mean, right? It's a whole thing. I understand wanting continuity of users. I also feel on the back end, there's ways that you can have software know who you are on the back end without having every user know who you are on the front end. And I really try to discourage people from like, I mean, some of it's even awkward because it's along it's along a continuum, right? Like at first, our ILS at the library, for example, we use Koha, pretty happy with it. But at first, we were like, let's ask people their pronouns. That's super helpful, right? And then, which was helpful. But then we got to a point where we're like, why are we even collecting this information at all? Like maybe the less information we collect, the better it will be for our patrons, because then nobody else can mess around with it if we're not totally comfortable with where our data is going. And so I think everybody needs to make, again, the choices that work for them. And if you're still asking people their pronouns in your ILS, it's fine. But thinking a little bit about whether information is important if you're somebody that builds software. Do you need to know somebody's gender? Why? Is there a really good reason, or are you just trying to slice out demographics so that you can do something that's not necessary? Is a question I often ask. Just reading sort of what.
Okay, I'm gonna jump on. Yeah, I just wanted to say from the other end of that. So Jessamyn touched on a lot of people use as justification the harms that happen in anonymous forums, and this is something I run into a lot in my research. Especially people talk about things like misinformation. There's all this like corpus of research about that, and I think a lot of times this sort of like the harm, these are harms that get attributed to this kind of like one bad user behavior that like the platform should correct, when actually I think the harm is a much more of a like an emergent epiphenomenon of like a lot of design construction. So like, like there's a lot about how people interact on social media, for example, that makes like the process of like producing and verifying information deeply pathological. And so I think a lot of times I think I encourage people to be skeptical when they see, the structure of the idea being something like, oh, there's this harm that users are doing because they have this thing exposed, therefore the platform should like gain, right? So like it would be really good for platforms if they collected our identity, because then their targeting ads get better, etc.
Well, we're seeing this with the age checking
Yeah,
ages.
really good example. Yeah, so
Do you want to spell that out just in case?
yeah, there's currently like a suite of age verification bills, and this is
Well, and in the UK, they
yeah,
passed it.
and
There's laws.
yeah, and it's passed in the UK, and this is a really convenient way for companies to de-anonymize people to get better targeting, whatever. But I think whenever there's sort of like a structure here that's like company produces thing, like I talked about in my thing, like there's this huge space available on how they could design it, but they design it in a very specific way, and I think it's sort of a little too cute to be like, oh, there's this one little part of it that caused all this bad behavior, when companies themselves had like the full design like universe to choose from, and then give them force them to like, not force them, but like give them the opportunity to do something even better for them that kind of rewards them for that bad behavior. And then the other, I just wanted to touch on this question about dead internet theory. Yeah, I mean,
I don't know what that is.
it's the idea that the internet, it kind of, I feel like it's categorized as like a conspiracy theory, but it's like the idea of it's not. It's like the idea that like the internet is like mostly just bots talking to each other at this point.
Really?
Yeah, and it's a pretty old idea, but obviously there's like a resurgence right now. But the one thing I want to say about that is there is, I think, a sort of early scholarship thinking about these kinds of questions. So it's like shout out to Dan McQuillan. He's somewhere in the UK.
How do you spell that?
I'm not sure. I'm not even going to attempt to spell it. McQuillan.
McQuillan?
Yeah, and he talks about decomputing, questions of like decomputing. And I think these are the kinds of questions, the computers, like this sort of like swamping of meaningless generated text is the direct result of like being able to generate, like people shouldn't just be able to generate AI videos all the time for free. That's like crazy wasteful, and that resource tie is directly related to that output. And I think Dan has, I mean, I don't know him, I don't know why I'm using his first name, but I think he's got the right thread to start pulling on there.
Yeah, and to sort of wrap up with what Catherine just said in the chat, they're from the UK, and part of the problem is the people who are writing the bills are trying to solve one problem. Oh, the children, like, oh, Facebook has an AI that flirts with children. So as a result, what we've got to do is make a big law that means we know how old everybody is, so our AI is only flirting with adults. And it's like, you made this problem, but for politicians really have like kind of the world's dumbest hammer in order to solve these problems. And this is what they came up with. And it's deeply inconvenient for humans, and it's only mildly more inconvenient for platforms. And I think that's one of the economies of scale versus economies of hassle that we see when politicians try to solve technological problems and they don't understand them and they don't consider ethics, accessibility, and your average novice user who just wants to meet somebody or get a job or file for unemployment or get a book.
All right. That seems like a good way to wrap it up. And I feel that mix of existential dread and hopefulness again. So,
That's me. Here I
Us in a
am.
nutshell.
yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been great. And as I mentioned before, we'll wrap up the recording now. And all of some of these resources that we just talked about at the end, I'll save them up and email everybody the things that we've talked about so you don't have to go ferociously Googling for things that we just discussed. But really appreciate it. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for having us.